welcome to Stillspeakpod. This is an update video about the Gabby Petito case. This case sure has its fair share of ups and downs. Some days you can barely keep up, and others days it's just complete crickets. And today is actually day 25 since Brian left his parents' home and went for a hike and never returned. Initially, it was said that he left on the 14th, but just a few days ago, we found out that it was actually the 13th. I talked about it in another video. I'm not going to go into it again. So if you want to hear that, you can go to those other videos. Today is also 3 weeks since his parents called Northport PD and asked them to come to their home, and they then told them that Brian had taken off. Yesterday, before I left to go visit with some family who is in town, I posted to my social media accounts about Christopher Laundrie, Brian's father, helping with the search in Carlton Reserve for his son. And I did it on the social media accounts because there was nothing for me to make a video about. I just shared that development on those platforms. I have a TikTok account, an Instagram, a Facebook, and a Twitter. I use that to put links to my videos, but I also use that to spread stories, especially missing person stories where there's not enough information to make a whole video, and it's just easier to put it on those platforms and just ask people to share the missing flyers. And so I posted it there only, and I was waiting to see if there was going to be any developments as far as him helping and if they had any luck with finding Brian. Unfortunately, still no Brian. So there's that. And so therefore, I didn't make a video last night because there was nothing to make a video about. Nothing happened. And I am seeing a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of people who are saying that it's not normal for the FBI or law enforcement to ask relatives to help in a search like this. That's actually not true, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. And despite there not being a lot of developments, I do have some things I want to address. I realize that a lot of people are new to following crime cases, and you can tell that a lot of people are new just by the comments and questions that they leave on public forums like news stations. And Gabby's case sparked a lot of interest, and I think some of these people got invested but had never followed one of these stories before, and so therefore, of course, they're not going to know a lot about how these types of cases actually go. Whereas I am a true crime follower, and I have been almost all of my life, even when I was a kid, thanks to my mom and grandma. And so therefore I do know how these cases usually go, and I have some experience in knowing how things take place and what can happen and not happen, etc. So I've addressed this before, but I'm going to address it again in case somebody didn't hear that video or somebody who hears this one needs to hear this. But everybody is asking why the parents have not been helping to find Brian. If they were really concerned, they'd be out there, they shows their guilt, blah, blah, blah. And they're asking, why haven't they been helping find him since the beginning in the reserve? And I even saw and heard a news station who's been covering this case a lot also harping on the fact that, they have not been out there helping all this time and wondering why now they had the change of heart. So as somebody who follows a lot of true crime cases, I'm here to tell you that in some cases where it involves dangerous areas, so dense, swampy, rough, steep type of terrain, the FBI or law enforcement, will tell the families not to conduct any searches or not to join them on searches. And the reason they have given before in other cases is that if you have one missing person, you don't need another one. It derails the search and the investigation for the person who was initially missing, and they rather use trained search volunteers who know the land, who know the area, who have the proper equipment, and have experience navigating these types of terrains. In the case of Gabby Petito, you have one dead, right, who was found out basically in the wilderness, and then you have one missing. The last thing you're going to want, right, is to now have something happen to a family member. In this specific case, that would be his parents. You bring them out to the reserve, or they just go out there all not trained on how to search the area, and they end up, hurt, dead, missing, eaten by an alligator. Now you have, another dead person or another missing person, and it completely takes off of the search efforts for the initial person who's missing. Now, look, in the case of Gabby Petito, they were focused on Gabby being missing, and in the process, what happened? Brian went missing, right? Quote, unquote, missing, right? He fled. So now him doing that complicated the investigation, clearly, because now they weren't just looking for Gabby, they were also looking for Brian. And then they found Gabby, and they were still continuing to look for Brian. So now you're not going to have the parents come out too, and now something happens to them. And then your focus isn't all on Brian, it's also on them. So the simple answer here is that it could very well be that the Laundries have wanted to help find their son all this time, and they were unable to do such or prohibited from doing such. The Carlson Reserve had been closed to the public. Christopher and Roberta Laundrie are citizens. They're the public. And they're not an exception just because it's their son that the FBI is looking for. And whenever I say this in a group, someone would reply and say, well, why haven't they been out there searching for him elsewhere? And all I have to say to that is, well, why would they? If they believe that he went into the reserve and that was the last place he was and the only place he could be, why would they be out there looking elsewhere? I mean, why? This doesn't make any sense. Where else are they going to go look? Just wander around Northport, aimlessly looking for him with no real guidance or any evidence or any clues to guide them where he may be? That's, of course, as they're not involved in any of this. I mean, they don't have access to what the FBI does. Hell, the FBI has the information, and they can't even find him. So how are they, the parents, going to find him without any evidence or information? Beyond that, leaving their home would bring an entourage of gawkers and reporters and nosy asses, to be frank. Hell, I'd probably be a nosy ass too and follow them. I'm not hating, I'm just saying they're the most recognizable people in their area right now besides Brian. So anywhere they go, they're going to be photographed and videotaped and yelled at and harassed, etc. And as far as making a plea, because I'm still seeing so many people say, why are they not making a plea for their son's, safe return? And I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. Why in God's name would they do such? Knowing damn well that the majority of the public don't care about Brian the way they cared about Gabby being missing. They don't. They know the public wants Brian to be found already, but not for the same reason they want him found, if they're not involved. This is not a normal missing person case. So asking the public to help find Brian is just plain dumb, to be honest and real. I mean, they don't need to ask that because people are already looking for him, just not for the same reason, like I said. I mean, he's literally become a real-life game of Where's Waldo. He just needs the striped shirt at this point. So, to even try to classify this the same as, like, Gabby being missing, Summer Wells being missing, Mia Marcano being missing, Olivia Fowler, Suzanne Fela, etc., etc., etc. It's just ridiculous. I mean, that was one of the first things we all said. We're like, Gabby's the one that's missing, not Brian, right? So this isn't a typical quote-unquote missing person that you would do a plea, you would do an interview, you'd be out there looking for them. It's not the same thing. Not making a plea does not equal that they know where he is, or else they would have made a plea or been out there looking for him. And I know many of you probably never listened to my first few videos on this channel, but I actually do go heavily into assumptions that people make about certain people involved in cases. And I go into how those assumptions about people ended up turning out to be wrong. So I'd actually suggest you go back and listen to those. And what I did was I was covering the Summer Wells case. I started on this channel a month ago about Summer Wells. I had a lot to say about Summer Wells. But because I was starting with a case, what I decided to do was I basically dedicated the first few episodes to really diving into the assumptions, blanket statements, and things of the sort that happen during these cases. And I cover it heavily. Because the Laundries are definitely not the first people to ever be so accused in the court of public opinion of some type of guilt. I mean, that it happens all the time. And half the time they are guilty and the other half they're not. But, you know, sometimes the court of public opinion doesn't care because they get something set in their head. And trust me, I'm watching. Okay, I'm watching from afar. I have not been listening to other true crime channels right now. I normally do until I started this channel. Now I don't really seem to have time to do that. I do follow, you know, like the main news about this case, but I haven't been listening to other creators' content. However, I know a lot of these true crime channels from prior cases, and so I know how they typically handle discussing these cases. And so I know that the way they're discussing this case is by focusing in on the gossip, the rumor, the drama, because that's what sells. That's what's getting the clicks. That's what's getting the subscriptions. That's what's getting the memberships, and that's what's getting them super chats. It doesn't even matter if they actually believe in what they're saying. If they know the mob is mostly against the parents, their content is going to be mostly about being against the parents, because that's what gives them attention or money. And I've also said on this channel that, you know, if I wanted the same thing, you know, clicks and views and super chats and money and all that other stuff, then I would be doing what they're doing. I'd be coming on here and I would have been feeding you. I've been feeding you all this gossip and drama, going live every 5 seconds with every little thing that happens, and just feeding the mobs of people to get everybody to come here and come listen to me. But I'm not doing that. What am I doing? I'm staying true to what I believe in. I'm staying true to how I view cases, and I stay true to sticking by my experiences in following these true crime cases. Now, I'm sure somebody is listening right now and they're rolling their eyes at me like, oh, give me a break. The parents are so involved. I get it. That's your opinion. That's cool. I like to look at things a little bit more logical and rational. Sorry. I don't think people realize that even in the court of public opinion, being accused and attacked and harassed, etc., is life-altering. I mean, I don't think you realize that. Like, not just actual court is life-altering. Court of public opinion can be extremely damaging to people. And it's not easy to get out of that at all. And so I'm not willing to do that to people. I don't think that's fair without any evidence to back that up or support that, and just going off of my opinion on their involvement in some way. And I did have a video about the parents, and I kind of went into my theory about them and their involvement, and I said in there that, I could be wrong. I'm not saying that I'm right, right? There's always a possibility here. And I did do a video, like I said, but I want to just talk about some things here. And here's what we know. We know that they had a lawyer ready for police when they showed up on the 11th. And initially, I found that to be insane, okay? Because I'm like, how in the hell would you have this lawyer before she's even reported missing, okay? And so immediately I was like, whoa, this says a lot, because who does that? Like, I've never even heard of that before. But then as time went on, right, Joe Petito said on Dr. Phil's show on the 20th that he warned the parents in text message that he was going to call the police, and that was on the 10th. So this mostly explained to me why they had a lawyer ready when police arrived the next day, because he gave them a heads up. So they got a lawyer in the meantime. And we know that Gabby's van was taken the next day on the 12th. And we now know that, mostly know, allegedly know, that Brian took off on Monday the 13th. Almost like he was worried that the van would disclose something, because he took off immediately after that. Boom, gone. We were told after the visit on the 17th about Brian being quote-unquote missing, that the parents only spoke about Brian, not Gabby, and had their lawyer on speaker while they were talking to Northport Police. And Northport Police is the one who told us this. And I don't want to get into Northport Police, but we'll get there eventually here in a moment. So that's what we were told. We were told that they didn't speak about Gabby, they spoke about Brian. The next day, the 18th, they started to search for Brian. On Sunday, they were also looking for Brian, but then they found Gabby, which this was the 19th, deceased in Wyoming. The next day, Monday, the 20th, so only 3 days after his parents told police that Brian took off, okay, a court-approved search warrant was executed on their home. We talked about this. The parents were removed from the home for a short period of time, and then they were allowed back inside. It wasn't long at all. And the FBI were in and out of their home all day. It was like 8 hours. And I said then, and I'm saying it again, that we have no idea what happened in that home in that 8-hour period of time that the Laundries were with the FBI. And it may be very well that they were fully cooperative at this point once they knew Gabby was deceased, because they were found that out the day prior. Just because law enforcement or the FBI did not come outside and share with us whether or not they were cooperating does not mean they weren't cooperating, okay? Just because they didn't come out and take a bullhorn to the crowd outside and say, they're cooperating now, everybody calm down, doesn't mean they weren't cooperating, okay? Because they don't have to tell us what's going on at all. There's no denying that the Laundries are being silent, but it could just be silent to us in the public. The same way the FBI is quiet with us, the public. Is anyone giving the FBI grief for not addressing us or giving us information? No. Why? Because we know that's their protocol. It's an active investigation. So wouldn't you think that the reason why the Laundries aren't speaking is also because it's an active investigation? I mean, their daughter came out and said she couldn't share certain things because she was told not to. So isn't it safe to assume that they too were told by not only their lawyer, which is what most lawyers would advise, but the FBI, do not speak because this is an active investigation. Now, they don't have control over them, but if they don't want to jeopardize or hinder the investigation, and they're going to take the advice of the FBI and the lawyer. And I'm somebody who believes in rights. Now, obviously, in certain situations, it sucks, right? Because you're like, you just want to force them to talk. But I can't believe in rights and then also be pissed off that they're not talking, right? Just because I'm a nosy ass and I want to know the information and I want to see them speak. No, I believe in your rights and in your right to silence and not having to speak when you don't want to speak. Just like the FBI, the Laundries don't owe us anything. Nothing. The only people they owe anything to is law enforcement and Gabby's family. And by working with law enforcement, that would be a step in the right direction to helping Gabby's family. Because if they're cooperating with the investigation, that will lead to figuring out what happened and getting her family some answers. We're nothing. We are absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of this. Now, when Gabby was missing, the public was a big help, right? Because people were able to investigate certain areas, check their video footage, look through her social media accounts for clues and hints, spread the information, etc. But once this became, a criminal investigation, we no longer are of any use. Period. We're just not. I mean, that's just the reality because we don't have access to the information that the FBI and law enforcement has. We don't have the resources that they have. And so, therefore, we're nothing in the grand scheme of this story. The only person who really matters, or people who matter in this story, is Gabby's family. Because she's not here. So it's really them. And since the search warrant on the home on the 20th, which was 18 days ago already, if you can believe that, FBI have gone back to the home twice. Once was for items of Brian's for DNA, and another time they claim was to get scent of Brian's. And during that visit, they also took a very quick look inside the camper that's in the driveway, which was a few days after we learned which campground they visited on the 6th and 7th of September. And both of these times, it seemed there had been prior talk with the parents before arriving because the visits were very quick. And this points to cooperation because, it could be search warrants, but I didn't get that impression due to how quickly it was, the visits, and it just tells me that they're being cooperative at this point. Here's the thing. The odds that Brian told his parents the truth when he got back, and they were just like, "Oh, son, it's no biggie. It's totally okay. We love you. And we got your back. Let's make a plan. It's all going to be good. No worries," is freaking slim. I mean, it just is. It's really slim. And I'm not saying there's no chance of that. In life, anything is possible. But it's so slim, it's ridiculously slim that's what happened. It's much more likely he lied to them. Brian would have needed a certain level of confidence that his parents would back him up and help him before he decided to tell him. True story. He would have been super confident that they were going to back him up. So I ask you, now, I'm not asking you what you would do because you have no idea what you would do without being in that same situation, or at least in most situations you can't know what you would do. But what I'm asking you to do is to think about your parents. Think about your parents. I don't even care how old you are. If you're 50, 30, if you're 18, think about your parents. This exercise is for everybody, okay? Now I want you to think real hard here. How confident are you that if you told not one, but both of your parents that you killed somebody, are you that they would both be like, okay, it's cool, and both be in agreement that the right thing to do is to help hide you? Think about your parents. How confident are you? Are you confident in what your parents would do? I mean, you know your parents, right? You know how they reacted to other things in your life. How confident are you that they both, not just mom, not just dad, but both, would just be like, oh, okay, well, son, why? And then they go into damage control and decide to help him to flee and hide. Would your parents do that? Would your parents go into damage control and flee and help hide you? I mean, you really don't know what they would do, right? But what I'm saying to you is, I want you to think, how confident would you be if you killed somebody? Are you confident that if you went to both of your parents, that they would back you up or not? Think about that for a moment. I just want you to consider what your confidence level is about your own parents. Let's move on. So, what would his parents' end game be? What would their motive be? My husband and I always say that, like when we're discussing something, like whether it's something we want to start doing or we want to or consider doing, we think like, okay, well, what's the end game? Like, why are you doing that? Or why do you want to do that? What's the motive? What's the end game? What would his parents' end game be to help him? I'm just curious. I mean, he can never live a normal life again. Well, right now, he only has a warrant for credit card fraud, basically. There could be a warrant that's sitting waiting for murder. We just don't know that. And that could just be being withheld for a reason. But I mean, he can never just be normal again. So what would be their driving force to help him? Excuse me. What? Just so their baby boy doesn't have to go to jail? I mean, this is their retirement years, at least one of theirs. This is a child that they thought was going to get married soon and eventually have a life of his own, just like his sister. They were going to have, an empty house. I know there's rumors they were supposedly divorcing, which if people actually believe that, which I don't know how true that is. I've never seen anything that's concrete showing that they were divorcing. But if they were trying to divorce prior to this, then why would they come together to both agree to hide their son, forcing them to have to stay together, and now not only stay together, but stay together trapped in this house, in a 1,400 square foot house alone together, 24 hours of the day? Who would want to do that? For what? I mean, do people really think that they enjoy what's going on outside their house? It's having all those tents set up on either side of their home filled with nonstop cameras and reporters. They can't even go in their own backyard, for Pete's sake, without somebody using a drone to spy on them. Which, by the way, give me a break on the hand that everybody thinks they see in the garden when Roberta was doing her gardening the other day. I know it's close to Halloween, but this isn't, the game Plants vs. Zombies, where Brian's hand is reaching up out of the dirt at his mother. Or is she handing him a freaking hot dog? Come on, please. I know we don't have a lot of information, and I know that our imaginations start going wild when we don't have, anything feeding us. But can we just leave the crazy to somebody else here? Because a hand coming up out of the ground, no. Just no. But anyway, I mean, do you really believe that they would risk the remainder of their lives to allow Brian to go on living out his life like a caveman? What's their end game here? Just let him go live out in the mountains and, grow a long beard, become like the movie with Tom Hanks? Like, have a freaking volleyball that he paints? I mean, why? So give up their lives for him to do that? He's eventually going to get caught. It's 2021. He's not, Clyde from Bonnie and Clyde. You don't get away for very long. I mean, I'm sure some do, but not a 23-year-old punk kid named Brian Laundrie. And there is only one thing I know for sure what I would do without being in that specific situation, because most situations you have no idea what you would do without actually being in that situation. But there's one thing I know for sure, and that is if my child's life was in danger, like a car was about to hit them or a bullet was coming at them, I'm jumping in front of them. Period. End of story. There's no doubt about it. There's no hesitation. I don't care how old they are. I would totally take a bullet for my child beyond just saying that. I actually would. That's the only thing I know for sure I would do in a situation. But in that scenario, in that specific scenario of a bullet coming at my kid, and hopefully I can get in front of the bullet in time, okay, they're innocent and about to become a victim. They aren't guilty and they made a victim. So I would give my life for my child. If they were innocent and about to become a victim, I would not give my life if my child was guilty and made a victim and took somebody's life. Right? It's a different scenario. It's a different scenario. So, really? They're going to give up their freedom? Their last years of their lives to help him escape? Escape to where? To do what? He cannot live in the wilderness forever. In the mountains. He can't do it. He's got to emerge at some point. So what? You're going to take the risk to give up the last years of your life for your son who probably eventually is going to come out and get caught? And then it was all for nothing that you helped him get away? I don't get it. I don't get why that would be their motive. And if Brian did have a high level of confidence and told his parents, then we'd have to wonder why it was that he was so confident that they would back him up after a murder. I mean, what if he told them and they called 911? Kind of like Casey Anthony's mom. If you recall, Cindy Anthony, she tracked down Casey and picked Casey up and she was grilling her in the car, and then she got home and she called the police, telling them the car smelled like a dead body, right? She threw her daughter under the bus. She totally did. I mean, that being said, Cindy later seemed to regret doing that, but that's a whole nother story. Cindy's interesting. The point being is that it's a risk to disclose to anyone, let alone your parent, that you killed somebody, because you don't know what they're going to do unless you have reason to believe that they would back you up and you have that high level of confidence that they would. But Cindy, she was like, my daughter's car had a freaking smell of a dead body in it. I mean, she couldn't have thrown her more under the bus than that. Do you think that Brian was or is capable of murder, but not capable of lying to his parents about the murder? It's just so much more likely he lied to them, right? It just is. And that lie was believable based on their experience of this couple, because they did live with both of them. And he clearly, obviously, I think it's very clear now, lied and manipulated the Moab officers in August. And clearly Gabby, she's dead for Pete's sake, right? She was murdered. Well, we don't know if she was murdered, but you know what I mean. She was killed by somebody else, that we know. And the only person who makes sense to have killed her is him. I mean, come on. If you break everything down, there's no getting around it. And I said before, my theory is that Brian told his parents that Gabby flew home to Long Island and that they were taking a break. It's a totally believable lie. I mean, while Gabby was living in their home, she was not their daughter. She was not their daughter-in-law, at least not yet. And she was not their responsibility. She was a grown woman and she had a family of her own. They'd have no reason to call her or to call her parents to make sure she was in Long Island. It wasn't their place, nor was it their business where she was. She was a grown woman. So if he told them that, they wouldn't have any reason to not believe that, and they'd have no reason, especially not the dad, to call her and be like, oh, are you in Long Island? I just want to make sure, sweetie. She's a grown woman. She can come and go as she pleases. They didn't have the responsibility of making sure she was there. They didn't. And I think at the point the parents were calling them, I think at that point it's possible the only reason that they didn't respond is they were probably blindsided and they were trying to process, okay, like, how did she go missing when Brian told us she was in Long Island? And then panic set in, like, shit, she's, missing, and you're her significant other, and you guys recently broke up, and they're automatically going to think you're a suspect, and they went into panic mode. They wanted to protect their kid. As a parent, I understand that feeling. Okay, I do. I think most parents should understand that. If you don't have kids, then you wouldn't understand that. I'm not defending them. I'm just willing to consider that they got just as effed over by their son. I think it's possible. When Brian fled, Gabby was still considered missing. And at minimum, the only person who knew Gabby was not missing was, guess who? Brian. Before law enforcement was able to determine that Gabby was no longer alive, Brian had been gone for almost a week. He left Monday. She was found the following Sunday. If his parents knew she was dead, ready to help him fight, hired him a lawyer, and was ready to back him all the way through this process, then why did he take off instead and basically throw his parents to the wolves? Why? Just left them to deal with all this. So they're helping him, and they were just like, you know what, son, you go. We're going to deal with all this. We're going to take on all this to the point that we can't even leave our house. All for you, son, because we want to protect you because you killed your girlfriend. I mean, they're still having to pay for a lawyer with him not around. They're still unable to come out of their home. I mean, they can technically come and go. We've seen them come and go a few times, but not much. I mean, but would you want to leave your house with all this shit going on? Hell no, not me. And it's not ending anytime soon. Or going away anytime soon. So, and their lives are completely not the same as it was prior to September 11th. That's for sure. And you might say, well, if they're not involved, then why did they wait days to let officers know that he took off? And you might say to me that they gave him a head start. And I'd say, yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. You can look at it that way. I ain't going to argue. Of course you can look at it that way. No doubt. But it could also be something else. Like they believed him, and when he didn't return, they either started to wonder if something happened to him, just like Gabby, and that maybe something deeper was going on, and that the reason they were both missing had a deeper issue at hand. That could be one thing. Or they may have considered that he was doing one of his many times that he'd done prior, where he would go and spend several nights camping, and they thought, he was doing one of those as a way to go and clear his head about Gabby being missing. And so they just gave him a few days to come back, thinking it was going to be like every other time. And this time he didn't come back. And it's also possible that that's when they realized that they were bamboozled by their own son. So they called the police to their home. Or they waited a few days to see if he would return. And when he didn't, the lawyer told them it was in their best interest, not Brian's, in their best interest to let police know. And maybe it was not until 2 days later, when Gabby's body was found in Wyoming, that they finally knew, or that they finally had to accept that he was connected to her death because she was dead in Wyoming. Maybe this was the moment that it all connected for them, and they were prior in denial. But there was no denying her body being found in Wyoming, right? And this is possibly when they made the connections. And it could be that's why when the FBI went to their home for hours the following day after she was found, it could be because at that point, they knew their son had something to do with her death, and they are now cooperating with the FBI. So for all we know, they've been cooperating since the 20th. That's 10, 18 days. We have no idea. Nobody knows that. And it doesn't matter what they say or do. There will always still be people, many actually, who would never believe them. They would still judge and attack them, pick them apart, etc. Again, our opinions in the public don't matter. They have nothing to prove to us. You might think, well, if they do that, then they'll get people to leave them alone. No, that's not how it works at all. Because I've been involved in many cases where the public found somebody in the court of public opinion guilty as charged, and it ended up being that they weren't involved at all, and the public didn't care what the evidence showed. They wanted to believe still that person was involved, even though everything showed that they weren't involved. So you can sit there and you can say, oh, well, if they come out, they clear the air, they explain all this, the public will leave them alone and they can go back to their lives. No. If only it was that easy. Once you are found guilty in the court of public opinion, unlike real court, people aren't so willing to give you any type of parole hearing. They've already sentenced you. You're done. I've seen it happen. There was a case. I brought this case up in one of my first videos. Harley Dilly. Some of you may know the name. He was a teen boy. He went missing. Sadly, short time later, he was found in a chimney of an abandoned home. He had climbed up. He tried to get through it. He didn't, know that you can get stuck, obviously. And he did, and he died a very tragic, horrible death. I mean, he basically suffocated for a long period of time before he died. Terrible. Like, one of the worst ways to die, because he definitely didn't die instantly. And everybody, prior to his body being found, was completely convinced that his parents killed him. And when it came out that it was not homicide, it wasn't murder, that there was nobody involved, this was a tragic accident of a teenage boy who went exploring and didn't realize that he could get stuck and died, okay, people would not accept that. They wanted those parents to be guilty, and in their minds, they were guilty no matter what. And it went two ways. You had the people who blamed them for why he even went to the abandoned home. So it was like, well, you might not have physically put him in there, but it's your fault that he went in there. So you're guilty as charged. You were a shit parent and you were fighting with your kid, and, as if parents don't fight with their teenagers. And then the other half of the people who thought that those parents were guilty prior to his body being found, they were like pissed. at the police department, and they were like, because this abandoned home wasn't far from his house, and they're like, you had to have checked it. You guys messed this up because the parents took his body, climbed up this telephone pole that was outside this abandoned house, and they put his body in there. As if nobody would see them climbing a telephone tower with a dead body or another human being who was a teenager, so big, and stuffing him into a chimney. They wouldn't let it go. They didn't want to admit they were wrong. They didn't want to accept it, even though all the evidence pointed that way. So no, it's not as easy as just come out and explain yourself and everything will go away. How great would that be if that were true? It's not. Now, eventually, people moved on to a different case, but you still got people talking about that specific case, and that's just one case out of many. There's so many. Same thing happened with Shane Carey involving Heidi Broussard, who was kidnapped with her newborn daughter for the baby. She was killed by her quote-unquote friend. Everybody thought her fiance was involved. Turned out he had absolutely nothing to do with it. And even still, after her body was taken from the home, from this friend's home, from the trunk of a car, people still thought Shane was involved and helped this friend to kill her because they don't want to admit that they were wrong. Now look at Cassie, Brian's sister. She came out the other day on the 4th. She came out to talk to the protesters. Now, her motive was, these people are disturbing my neighbors and they're upsetting my kids. So I got to go outside. I got to speak to them. That's what they want. I'm going to give them what they want, right? That was her way of handling it. And for most, that worked, right? Most people were like, oh, well, I respect her for coming out and addressing people. She didn't have to do that, though. She didn't. And she didn't do that for us or for the people out there. She was doing it for her sanity, her kid's sanity, and her neighbor's sanity, not for us. Because she knows that we don't deserve her to do that, right? But then you still had people, and I have people on my TikTok right now commenting on a video about her, saying she knows more, she's lying, So that wasn't good enough. They still think that she's involved, that she's guilty, that she's hiding him, etc. So that didn't change anything. Most people, yeah, but not all, you know. And I seen on one of the news stations where one of the reporters were even saying they're not even sure they totally believed her because they don't believe that when she saw Brian at the campground that she didn't ask him where Gabby was, that there had to be this conversation. And I always tell people this, if you have a thought, follow that thought through just a little bit further before like putting it out into the atmosphere, because here's why. If Cassie shared the reason, or excuse me, if Cassie shared what Brian told her as his explanation for where Gabby was, she would be giving us a big part of this investigation. Why? Because then we would know what Brian was telling people about Gabby, right? And that's a big part of this investigation. So she's not going to tell us that. So just because she didn't tell us what Brian said doesn't mean that she didn't ask when she saw Brian. I'm sure she did. I mean, most people would do that. If somebody comes to your house without their significant other, you're like, oh, where's so-and-so, right? Or you make plans, they're like, oh, he's not coming because he's at work, right? You give an explanation so that people don't ask when you arrive. So by her sharing what Brian told her, right, and saying, well, I asked him and he told me, X, Y, Z, if she told us, the public, that's a big part of this investigation, because we can then assume that whatever he told her is what he also told his parents. And the police or the FBI probably doesn't want that information out. So again, just because she didn't tell us doesn't mean that she didn't ask. It wasn't like she just showed up to the campground and Gabby wasn't there and she just, started eating s'mores and didn't ask where she was. I'm almost positive she did. And now to end this, the other day, I was complaining and releasing my frustrations to you because there has been a million times throughout this case where people were like, when was the last time everybody saw Brian? When was the last time anybody saw Brian? And I kept telling people in the group, like, just listen to Josh Taylor, the Northport police spokesperson, because he said multiple times they saw Brian on first contact, which would have been the 11th. And then I played for you a clip, because there's 3 clips of Josh Taylor saying this 3 different times. But I played you one of the clips, and I said, here, listen, you can hear it with your own own ears. He says they did see him. They just didn't get a chance to speak to him. And then I had seen something circulating where Josh Taylor is now saying that they never saw him. But at the time when I saw this, it didn't look like a legitimate Twitter account. So I was complaining, but at the same time, I was skeptical that this information even was coming from Josh Taylor. Also because I heard him say it 3 times. I was like, why all of a sudden would this change? Well, it turns out that, no, that was legit. And Josh Taylor is now saying that nobody ever saw him on the 11th, which really, really bothers me because I like to stick to the facts, and I kept telling people that they said that they saw him, and now they're saying that's not true. That being said, it could have been a miscommunication. Maybe the chief was telling Josh that they saw him, and maybe that's really not the case. I don't think that Josh was flat out lying. He's the spokesperson, so he's going to answer and repeat whatever he's being told. And so that could be the situation here, where maybe at first he really did think they saw him, and that's what he was told, but later it was found that that was actually not true. It's possible that there was body cam footage that they later watched, or maybe they re-spoke with that officer who went to the home, and maybe he was like, oh no, I never saw him. And they were like, wait, what? We've been telling people we saw him. So obviously them not seeing him on the 11th is a really big deal. And it's also a big deal because we heard this from Josh Taylor. Well, now Brian Ensign, who's one of the biggest reporters out there right now, he's been basically living outside the laundry home. He's been fantastic. He has the means and the capability to do those types of things that many of us probably wish we could do. He did an interview with Josh Taylor today. And in this, Josh Taylor was asked if they found anything about Brian in the Carlton Reserve. And he says, now this is important, he says that they haven't found anything. They don't have anything basically that leads them to know that Brian was in the reserve. Okay? And the issue here is that the FBI took over the investigation on the 27th. So Northport Police is not leading the investigation, and they are working together, but I do have to question how much the FBI is sharing with Northport, and if Josh would even know that. I'm sure he would, but I do question that. But now, because Josh Taylor had given us untrue information about somebody seeing Brian on the 11th, I'm questioning whether or not this is true, because the thing here is they're spending a lot of time in this reserve. They spent, I think it was $1.2 million already for the search. It might be even more by now. And you're going to tell me that you're still out there based upon nothing? I find that really hard to believe. And if that's actually true, then taxpayers should be losing their shit right now over it and saying, are you kidding me? You're here for no reason. Now, I do believe that they have something. They have to have something, whether it's just, a video camera of him walking into the reserve, something to that effect. They have to have something to have been out there all this time. I'm finding it really hard to believe that they've just been out there under the assumption that he's probably there. I do. And if that's the case, I'm at a loss for words, because are you kidding me? You're spending all this time based upon nothing? I don't know. Typically, that would not be the case. Typically, they would not continue to keep going there unless they had something. So this isn't really adding up. And now because of this 11th misinformation, I'm questioning everything. And I'm going, okay, so basically what you're telling us is that you guys have a freaking clue where the hell Brian is. Like, nothing? No, like, we're not even remotely close to finding this dude. And then he was asked, like, is he alive? And he basically gives this, like, it's 50-50. Well, yeah, I think that's a no-brainer, right? He may be alive, he may not be alive. I mean, it's kind of like when you're pregnant. It's either going to be a boy or it's going to be a girl. You know, it's not going to be an it. So, I don't know. I'm just finding myself really frustrated with the case at this point because it's like every day people think, okay, this is going to be it. They're going to be finding something. They're going to find Brian. And then you hear an interview like this and you're like, okay, well, you guys have been like just hanging out in this reserve for freaking 3 weeks and you have nothing? Nothing? Nada. Like, you're not even like an inch closer to finding Brian Laundrie? Or what are we talking about here? And Brian Ensign said to him, you know, people are worried about this case going cold. And he's like, you know, it's got a lot of attention. It's hard that it would ever go cold. I'm going to have to disagree with Josh Taylor on this because I've seen a lot of cases, not as big as Gabby's case, but pretty close to being as big as Gabby's case. And eventually people get bored and they move on. We have very short attention spans. We just do. And you see that in just the news cycles. So it'll be one thing for X amount of time and then it gets something else and then something else. They don't usually do all big stories, you know, multiple big stories at once. Our attention spans only last so long, and people do eventually just move on. And if people are just moving on, that's less pressure on police to you know, continue an active everyday investigation into finding him. Now, they'll always have to look for him because it's part of their job, but public pressure is when it becomes helpful in an active investigation because not only does the family want answers, but the public wants answers for the family. And so that drives law enforcement to continue going at a good rate. Now, we don't want them continuing going at a good rate of looking for him if there's nothing, though. Like, yeah, we want you out there searching for him, but if you're searching this reserve for the last 3 weeks and you've got nothing, it's time to move the hell on, okay? And besides all that we've, you know, just now discussed, the other things that are happening are just things that I think are very, I guess, immature, ridiculous. But this goes back to everything I just said about accusing these parents with little to no evidence of their involvement so far, at least to our knowledge. We have not seen anything that, you know, is concrete connecting them to the disappearance of their son. And, you know, we're having things like people are flying a plane over the house. You know, the other day I told you it said, you know, justice for Gabby, TikTok, time's up. Such an assumption that these parents are involved. Another one tonight, and Brian Ensign posted a video of 2 women who live in their neighborhood who hammered in a picture of Gabby, this large picture of Gabby, and it says, you know, hey, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Laundrie or Roberta and Christopher, remember me? I used to live with you, and it's Gabby. Like, I get it, but again, you don't know if they're involved. You're assuming they're involved. It's the same thing with the blowhorn people out there saying it's time for you to stop being silent when we don't know if they're being silent. We don't know. They could be cooperating. So I think a lot of these things are kind of ridiculous and over the top. But people are going to do what they want to do. I just think it's a little unfair at the moment that people are going so hard at them. And some of these things, I don't think, even if they are involved, would matter. Like, putting the banner over their house, what are they going to do? Be like, oh, you're right, banner. Let me go turn myself into police and let them know where Brian is. It's not going to happen. That banner's not doing anything. That money being spent can go to her foundation. It can go to organizations that help find missing people. There's Texas EquiSearch. They do amazing work. I'm sure they'd love the money to help other people. going on their lawn to hammer in this sign is crossing a line. And the amount of people that were cheering it on just shows you that people love the drama. The mob love to be fed with the drama. And let's face it, right? Most of us hate drama when it involves us. We like other people's drama, right? Typically we do. It's the way it goes. Most people do. It's funny because there's actually a YouTuber who always talks about, I hate drama, but they have a drama channel, which is kind of funny because like you thought you hated drama. Well, she doesn't like drama that involves her. She doesn't care about other people's drama. So there's that. But that's just this is how we are as people. As soon as it's about us, then we all of a sudden hate the drama and hate the juicy and gossipy and immature type things, like leaving a laundry basket out of the side of the home and calling them dirty laundry. I mean, seriously, that sounds so kindergarten, like something you would have, like Brian's nickname would have been in kindergarten by some other kid who was like the bully of the class. I mean, come on. This is like a real story. This is a real girl who died, and I just think it's too much, personally. But I don't control people. People are going to do what people are going to do. I'm just here to express my opinion about it. Now, I won't lie. If I lived close to the area, I'd go stand outside the house. I probably wouldn't scream. I most likely wouldn't be chanting. I most likely wouldn't be leaving anything on their lawn, walking on their lawn, or anything of the nature. I probably would just go out there just out of curiosity and wait and see if anything happens. I mean, I'm not perfect by any means. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't do something like that. I think most people would want to do that if they're following a case, just out, curiosity. But anything further than that, you got to draw a line somewhere. You have to remember that you didn't even know this girl. I mean, you can feel sympathy for her, and I do. You've heard me on this channel. I've gotten choked up about Gabby. I feel terribly for her. I do think she was abused, and I've gotten very sentimental about that and felt great sympathy for her family. But you have to learn to when to draw the line. You have to remind yourself she wasn't your daughter. You didn't know her. So if you're getting so emotionally worked up to the point that it's making you harass somebody, you got to start looking within a little bit and wondering why you're doing that. And that's that. And at the end of the day here, I'm going to say it one more time, just to drive you crazy. The chances that Brian came home and said, hey, Mom and Dad, you're never going to believe this, but I killed Gabby and I left her in Wyoming. And they were like, oh, okay. We want to go camping? Come on, son. We'll go camping for a couple of days. Get your mind off things. It's all good. Come on. Come on. Think about how ridiculous that is. It's most likely not what happened. Maybe at some point he ended up having to tell them, possibly, after her parents started calling. But the fact you really think that he came home on the first and just walked up to the door and stuck his key in, opened the door, was like, Mom, Dad, I'm back, I killed Gabby, is no. It didn't happen that way. You might see that done in a movie. This is not a movie. And that's enough of my ramblings for the day. I end up doing these ramblings when we don't have many updates to discuss. So I took the opportunity to address this again because I just keep seeing so many people who are just out for these parents. And I can't wrap my head around it. I really can't without any evidence to back it up. But we shall see what happens. They could be involved. We might find out they are. We might find out they're seriously involved or a little bit involved, or maybe were involved initially but then later turned on their son. I mean, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm definitely not saying that. Anything's possible. I just personally like to see the evidence. And right now the evidence isn't showing me that. It's a whole lot of circumstantial of they're in their home and they're not speaking, they're not looking for him, and they're not pleading for him. And all of that stuff has explanations for it. So we just gotta wait and see, and we'll see what tomorrow brings. I would say hopefully tomorrow is the day that they find Brian Laundrie, but considering the interview that Josh Taylor gave Brian Ensign today, if it's in fact true that they've been in the Carlton Reserve for the last 3 weeks and they have nothing showing that Brian's there, I have very little hope that Brian's going to be found anytime soon. Oh, I actually did want to talk about something. I like when cases come up that are unique and it makes me have to actually research something that I didn't know before, because one of the biggest takeaway from cases for me is what can we learn from it, right? And I like to take certain things away from cases and to have more knowledge about it so that if it comes up again, I could be like, oh, I remember this, I looked this up and blah, blah, blah. And so I was looking up if you were going to do like minimalist type camping and like what you would need, and I found this whole article that was really interesting, and so it basically talks about like air, food, water, and says, you know, you have to make sure you have air, obviously. It says that you can survive 3 days without water, but that doesn't take into account strenuous activity. That's just living. And, you know, it talks about you can use iodine pills, which my husband actually mentioned to me when I was asking him. And, iodine pills basically makes any type of water almost, entirely safe to drink. And then there's things like the Life Straw, which removes like 99.9% of bacteria. And it's really small and tiny. And so people were talking about, like, how can he be surviving out there all this time? Well, there's definitely not clean drinking water in there. It's mostly swamp water or rainwater. But if he did plan to take off at some point, easy Google search would have found that he can get iodine pills and make any water in that reserve or anywhere for that matter safe for him to drink. And it talks about you would want to have everything that you can fit in your backpack as far as food. And it actually gives you different types of food that you can pack to help you survive. It talks about MREs, trail mix, jerky, split pea soup, dehydrated chili, and it talks about how you really just need calories, vitamins, and minerals. And it talks about like dehydrated type food or any food that's merely an ounce if you were to put it in your backpack so that you can fit as much as possible. And it also talks about having a fishing line so that you can catch night crawlers, which can provide you a limitless supply of food. If you use the fishing line, a hook, just a spool of it, like you don't need an actual fishing rod, just a spool of it. And then it talks about a poncho and, a spare clothes where you want it to be light clothing that you can roll up easily in the bottom of your bag, waterproof matches, basically anything that you can fit in a backpack for a short period of time. It talks about a lighter as well as the matches in case, the matches don't work. And it's really interesting. This is all information, they say, to make you survive at least a month out in some type of, wooded, swampy type of area. Talks about a very small survival knife, a small first aid kit in case you get hurt, and one of those really small headlamps that you can attach to a hat. So this idea that, he couldn't still be out there somewhere, with one little Google search, I found this in seconds. He could have done the same thing. And I'm sure they are searching his Google history, and he may have done so, or he had in the past when he would do these camping trips. So it's really interesting to learn about. I suggest everybody kind of look it up, because then when you read it, you kind of learn how easy it is. And then it talks about, how to get radiation if it's cold outside, which is definitely not the case in Florida for him right now. And so that's not an issue. As far as the weather right now in Florida, now he's somewhat South Florida, somewhat Central South. And so it's definitely going to be hot during the days. It rains every day in Florida for at least 15 minutes, tops 30 minutes to cool everything down. So in the evenings, you're looking at about late 70s, early 80s. So that's not really an issue for him right now. Now, when you get in closer to like December, January, when the weather starts changing in Florida, that would be an issue for him. But for right now, he's totally fine. And if he's in some type of wooded area, he'll have coverage from the rain. And so a lot of people are like, oh, that's my phone. A lot of people are saying like, what he has to be mentally suffering right now if he's still out there with nothing and no phone. And oh yeah, he's definitely mentally suffering without any of that, which is him in some wooded area, with just matches, a lighter, and some food. Yeah, he's suffering greatly. But when you go into survival mode, right, and you have a goal in mind, you're going to bear it out as much as you possibly can. And it could be that they're actually hoping that he gets to a breaking point soon and he kind of just makes a mistake or gives himself up because he can't handle it. If he's traveling around, the biggest thing with that is that there's a mental thing to that as well, because you're always looking over your shoulder. You think everybody you're talking to is a police officer, and you're concerned about getting caught on surveillance and all that other stuff. So either way, whether he's hiding out in the woods by himself for the last 25 days or he's traveling around, he mentally is suffering a great deal. That is for sure. So we could see some activity as far as him being caught soon if he does, in fact, come out into the public, or he just finally just caves and it's just like, I can't freaking deal with this anymore. I'm seeing things, I'm hearing things, I never sleep out here. You know what I'm saying? So it's possible. But go ahead and look that up. It might actually make you realize how easy it is for him to have been out there all this time. And that's that. So we're going to call it a night. This might be my longest video yet. I don't know. Maybe. Almost. So until next time, I'll see you soon.